Our Public Schools District Supervisor, Ma'am Beatrice E. Agdal, to all school heads, teachers, guests, good morning. My topic for today is language acquisition. My name is Teacher Jacqueline B. Bagungon, your presenter. For children learning their native language, linguistic competence develops in stages, from babbling to one word to two word, then telegraphic speech. Babbling is now considered the earliest form of language acquisition because infants will produce sounds based on what language input they receive. Now, what is language acquisition? First language acquisition refers to the way children learn their native language, while the second language acquisition refers to the learning of another language or languages besides the native language. So these are the two steps in language acquisition. The first language acquisition and the second language acquisition. Now, there are three theories in language acquisition. We have here first one, the imitation, second one, the reinforcement, and the third one, we have the analogy. Imitation is the idea that children imitate what they heard around them. This theory is based on the behaviorism of theory of feedback or reinforcement. The idea that parent correction of children's speech errors is what causes children to produce grammatically well-formed utterances. The second one, we have the reinforcement. It refers to anything that increases the likelihood that a response will occur. So in the reinforcement, it also does work because it actually seldom occurs, and when it does, the reinforcement is correcting pronunciation or truthfulness and not grammar. For example, a sentence such as apples are purple would be corrected more than often because it is not true as compared to a sentence such as apples is red, regardless of the grammar. The third one, we have the analogy. It involves the formation of sentences or phrases by using other sentences as samples. Now, in analogy, if a child hears the sentence, I painted a red barn, he can say, by analogy, I painted a blue barn. Yet, if he hears the sentence, I painted a barn red, he cannot say, I saw a barn red. The analogy did not work this time, and this is not a sentence of English. In the picture here, we have here the mechanism of language acquisition. It is all about behaviorism, the imitation, reinforcement, and analogy. In the computer model, we call this one connectionism model, which is no grammatical rules are stored anywhere. Under these, we have analogy and reinforcement. That is, the child's environment has specific properties. Just like analogy, imitation, and reinforcement down to it cannot account for language development. So what the child acquires is a set of sentences rather than a set of grammatical rules. In language acquisition, language is extremely complex. Okay? Children before 5 already know the complex system that make up the grammar of a language. As for example, the syntactic, phonological, morphological, semantic, and pragmatic rules of grammar. Children also acquire a system of rules that enables them to construct and understand sentences most of them have never produced or heard before. Children also are creative in the use of language. Nobody teaches grammatical rules to the children. So we have here the development of grammar. First one, the phonology. Second one, morphology, syntax, and pragmatic. In phonology, children acquire the small set of sounds. By manner of articulation, it includes nasal, glide, stops, liquids, fricatives, and affricates. By place of articulation, features, it includes labials, velars, alveolars, and palatals. Morphology. In overgeneralization, children acquire rules of their particular language. So children's utterances reflect their internal grammar. In the syntax, the children here understand word order rules. And in the pragmatic, language in context, child assumes that his listener knows who is talking about. In phonology, a child's error in pronunciation is not random but rule governed. Typical phonological rules include consonant cluster simplification. Say for example, spoon becomes poon. Devoicing of final consonants. Dog becomes dog. And voicing of initial consonants, we have truck becomes druck. And consonant harmony, doggy becomes goggy, or big becomes gig. So that is how the children under phonology in acquiring language. In morphology, an overgeneralization of constructed rules is shown when children treat irregular verbs and nouns as regular instead of went as the past tense of go. Children use goed because the regular verbs add an ed ending to form the past tense. Similarly, children use gooses as the plural of goose instead of geese because regular nouns add an s in the plural. Language acquisition is a creative process, and we have what we call the innateness hypothesis. What is this innateness hypothesis? From the word innate, nana sa kinaiyahan sa bata. The innateness hypothesis of child language acquisition, it is proposed by Noam Chomsky, states that the human species is pre-wired to acquire knowledge and that the kind of language is also determined. Many factors have led to this hypothesis, such as the ease and rapidity of language acquisition despite impoverished input, as well as the uniformity of languages. All children will learn a language, and children will also learn more than one language if they are exposed to it. Children follow the same general stages when learning a language, although the linguistic input is widely varied. So, the language faculty is innate. The infant is endowed with a UG. Now, what do you mean by this UG? UG is a universal grammar. Universal grammar helps children to extract the rules of their language. Children also acquire a complex grammar quickly and easily. Children create grammars based on the linguistic input and are guided by the universal grammar. Brain is equipped for acquisition of human language grammar. So we have here the stages in language acquisition. First one, we have the bubbling. It is the linguistic ability, the auditory input. This is, for example, they bubble like b, or the, or they bubble. In the holophrastic stage, children's utterance is one word. In the telegraphic stage, the children starts to put words together into sentences. Say for example, Mommy, I want to eat. Or Mom, I'm pooping. And the words and sentences that children produce at each stage of development conform to the set of grammatical rules. Then humans are born with predisposition to discover the units that serve to express linguistic meaning. So that is the part of the first language acquisition. So the first language acquisition, it involves the analogy, morphology, the behaviorism, and all the innateness hypothesis of acquiring a word or acquiring a language that is part of the first language acquisition. Now, now for the second language acquisition or two acquisition, this refers to the acquisition of a second language by someone who has already acquired a first language. So, bilingual language acquisition refers to the simultaneous acquisition of two languages beginning in infancy before 3. Some amount of language mixing is normal part of early bilingual acquisition process and not necessarily an indication of any language problem. So we have here the second language acquisition teaching methods. So we have here 9 language acquisition teaching methods. So the first one, we have the grammar translation. The grammar translation, wherein the student memorizes words, inflected words, and syntactic rules and uses them to translate from native to target language and vice versa. Most commonly used method in schools because it does not require teacher to be fluent. However, least effective method of teaching. So they're just going to translate a word, or you're going to memorize it. Then number 2, we have the direct method. The direct method is the native language that is not used at all in the classroom, and the student must learn the new language without formal instruction based on theories of first language acquisition. And the third one, we have the audiolingual. The audiolingual is a heavy use of dialogues and audio based on the assumption that language learning is acquired mainly through imitation, repetition, and reinforcement influenced by psychology. So the teacher may use of dialogues and audio that will help the learners to be more to acquire the second language. Number 4, we have natural approach. The natural approach emphasizes on vocabulary and not grammar. It focuses on meaning, not form. Use of authentic materials instead of textbook or realia. In introducing a word, for the learners to acquire it very fast, then use a realia. See, for example, if you want the word to be retained in the mind of the learners, then you use realia. And number 5, we have the silent way. Teachers remain passive observers while students learn, which is a process of personal growth, no grammatical explanation or modeling by the teacher. It's just a silent way. Number 6, we have total physical response. The total physical response, students here play active role as listener and performer, and they must respond to imperative drills with physical action. Number 7, we have Suggestopedia. The Suggestopedia, the students here always remain comfortable and relaxed and learn through memorization of meaning of text. So the memorization of meaningful text, although the goal is understanding. So even if it is so understandable, they're going to memorize the meaningful text. Say for example, the poem. Okay. Then number 8, community language learning. The community language learning, these are the materials that are developed as course progresses and teacher understands what students need and want to learn. Learning involves the whole person, and language is seen as more than just communication. Then number 9, we have the community language teaching. It incorporates all components of language and helps students with various learning styles. It uses of all the communication-based activities with authentic materials, needs of learners that are taken into consideration when planning topics and objectives. So here are the second language teaching methods. So it's either you go to the synthetic approach or bottom-up method, or in the analytical approach or the top-down method. The synthetic approach bottom-up method, it is the teaching of the grammatical, lexical, phonological, and functional units of the language. So, na din na ang grammar translation. For the analytical approach or the top-down method, the goal is to select topics, tasks that are relevant to the needs and interest of the learner. So, it is a content-based instruction. So, to sum it up, you can choose what approach in teaching second language to the learners. So you can choose if you want to teach bottom-up method or the top-down method. So the bottom-up is the synthetic approach and the top-down is the analytical approach. So we have here the goals for each approach. So you just simply follow the flow. Okay. So we have the 4 skill areas. The 4 skill areas of learning a foreign language need to be addressed consistently and continually. Good lesson plans incorporate all 4: listening, speaking, and reading, or the vocabulary, and writing, which is the grammar. Native speakers do not learn the skill areas separately, nor though they use them separately, so they shouldn't be taught separately. However, it is easy to fall into the trap of teaching about the language instead of actually teaching the language. So for your assignment or for the expected output for this topic, you need to create a lesson plan using the second language teaching methods. So you can choose. You can choose if your lesson plan would be a synthetic approach or analytical approach. Okay. Thank you for listening.